thanks for tuning in to Mirror Now. Welcome to another episode of Investor's Guide, where we help you with your financial planning, understanding all about saving, investing, and how to make your money work for you. And of course, we'll answer all of your personal finance related questions. Well, it's been a rainy few days for Mumbai, and more rains are in fact expected over the next few days. There were some areas yesterday which saw severe waterlogging, due to which people's houses got flooded. Cars were all inundated. In fact, car and home insurance are simple ways that you can actually protect your savings from taking a big hit against such unforeseen eventualities. That's one of the points that we are going to focus on today. We started this conversation yesterday, but there is still a lot more to talk about. And of course, we'll also get all of your questions answered. So do send us all your questions. You can reach out to us on email, on Facebook, on Twitter, or simply call us. All the details, they're flashing on your screens. But let's quickly get to today's show. Joining me is Certified Financial Planner Harsh Roongta. Harsh, thank you so much for joining us on Investor's Guide on Mirror Now. So like I was just pointing out, it's been extremely heavy rainfall for the last couple of days, and especially yesterday there were incidents of cars being inundated, houses, the water really coming into houses. And this is perhaps a good time to explain and sort of emphasize on the need for something like car insurance and home insurance. Let's first talk about home insurance, because again, for home insurance there are different kinds. There's one that covers the structure and there's one that covers the contents of your house. If you can just first explain the entire concept to us.
So I think household insurance is not very popular in India, and I think there are probably reasons for that. One major reason is that you cannot get a content only insurance. You either insure the structure plus take additional insurance for the content, or only content you will not get an insurance for. Now, typically in India, because most of us don't stay in independent houses, most of us stay in apartments, there is, people find it a little not very useful to cover only their structure. Logically, the cooperative society should cover the entire structure, and the contents can be covered by individual owners, but that is something that does not really work very well in India. That's the reason it's not very popular. That does not take away from the fact that covering your contents against various risks that you have, whether it is burglary, whether it is theft, whether fire, earthquake, lightning, things like that, all the risks that your content run, you have invested so much of your time and money into making your home, that your ability, that the loss that you incur, at least you should be able to recover the monetary loss that you incur should your house flood and your contents get damaged. So I think household insurance is extremely important, though very little used.
Right. So Harsh, I think one of the reasons why perhaps people sort of are A, not aware, and B, also perhaps believe that it might be something that's very expensive and may not be worth it. If you can just explain to us, how much would a householder's insurance really cost?
So the structure cost is not very high. So there are various risks. Your cost will depend on what risks you cover the structure for. Some part of that risk is expensive. Typically, a terrorist risk, for example, is expensive. But if it's your house, maybe you don't really want to cover for a terrorism risk. So even if you just take the normal fire or the other regular earthquake, those kind of natural perils, if your building falls down or if your house falls down because of that, then what you need to cover is the construction cost. Nothing happens to the land. So the construction cost, typically it would be about, I think, whatever is the value that you cover for. Roughly it will be 0.2% roughly. That would be the cost of the cover. So that's not very expensive, though, and the cost of construction is something you need to estimate at a certain percentage per square foot. So as I said, that really is the issue, is that just covering your own construction cost may not be useful because the entire building should be covered. As far as content is concerned, it is valuables, which is like jewelry, cash, that is expensive. If you want to cover that, that costs about 1%. But other things in your house like electronic items or furniture, etc., is not very expensive. Often I am not able to give you the quote, but it is not at all expensive. It is something that should definitely be covered.
All right, well, Harsh, we'll come back to this conversation, but let's get in a query first, coming in from Ramakrishnan from Chennai, who says, I'm 34 years old and my risk appetite is high. My investment horizon is 15 years. I'm looking for a retirement corpus of 1 crore. I have invested 3,000 each in the following funds. He's got Mirae Asset Large Cap, Reliance Small Cap, Kotak Multi Cap Fund, Aditya Birla Frontline, Kotak Emerging, as well as Mirae Asset Emerging Blue Chip Fund. So he's got about 6 funds, and he wants to know whether any changes are required in his entire portfolio. So Harsh, he's got a good goal, he's got a good horizon, and he's started making investments in the right direction. So a lot of positive things.
Oh, absolutely. I think just the fact that he does have a goal, he has a time horizon, he's obviously chosen the funds with some degree of care. There are 2 large cap funds, there is a small cap fund, there is a large and mid cap fund, there is a multi cap fund, and there is a mid cap fund as well. So, I mean, that's a good mix. But I think using this as an example to Mr. Ramakrishnan and the other viewers watching this, I think the first step of any financial planning exercise is estimating your goal correctly. Just as a case in point, let's take what Mr. Ramakrishna has said. He is 34 years old. He says he needs 1 crore after 15 years. He does not say for what, or he says it's for retirement corpus. So let's just assume that he is going to retire at 49. How much will this 1 crore be? This 1 crore after 15 years is equal to roughly 42 lakhs in today's money. And that typically, remember, after 49 is probably going to live till say 85. People live till well into their 80s and 90s now. But let's just assume 85, which means he is going to live for 36 years post his retirement. And this amount, the 42 lakhs in today's value, will typically give him a pension of about 10,000 rupees per month in today's value, adjusted for inflation. Is that adequate? Not adequate? I would think that's not adequate, simply going by the fact that 18,000 rupees is the investment that he is making today. So his lifestyle is unlikely to adjust to a 10,000 rupee per month pension. So I think the first thing that Mr. Ramakrishna should do is look at his goal itself. Second thing is, okay, let's move. As I said, these fund choices are good, but he has far too many funds. I mean, 6 funds for a single goal. I think he needs consolidation. When you buy too many funds, what happens is you are effectively buying the market. And you could buy the market, which means buy an index at a much cheaper cost. So if at all you want to diversify into the index, you can do it at a much cheaper cost than an active fund. My advice to him is to consolidate. So for example, large cap, between the two, Mirae large cap and Birla Sun Life Frontline Equity, he can stick to Mirae. Then he has got 1 large and mid cap, which is Kotak Standard. He's got a multi cap, which is Kotak Standard Multi Cap. He has got Mirae Asset Emerging Blue Chip, and he has got
Aditya Birla.
Aditya Birla was a large cap.
Yes.
Basically, the multi cap he can sort of consolidate in Kotak Standard Multi Cap, and he can keep the Reliance Small Cap. So 1 large cap, 1 multi cap, 1 small cap. That is the thing that I would advise him to do. That gives him diversification across fund houses as well as across market capitalization.
Right. So, Harsh, while we are talking about retirement planning, and one thing you mentioned, which I think gets overlooked a lot, is calculating today how much you will need for when you retire, which could be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the line. And that is something where a lot of people get confused as to how to calculate that. So, if you can take us through, what is the simplest way to decide how much you're going to need when you retire 15, 20 years down the line? How much should you account for inflation? And how should you account for your expenses that you will need then?
So I think the first thing to understand is that compounding is something human mind is not made to comprehend. So you will need to use a calculator, a reasonably fancy calculator like an Excel or a financial calculator. It is best you take advice from an advisor, but if you don't want to do it, please use a calculator, a calculator that can do compounding for you. That is one. And the best way to do this in simple steps is assume if I retired today, what would I spend? Okay, obviously, if you are actually to retire today, by the time you actually retire, you would have paid off your home loans. You are unlikely to have expenditure on education for your children, etc. Most people won't. So take those out of your current living expenditure, okay, because those would have been paid for by the time you retire. Add a little bit for medical expenditure that's not reimbursable at that under a health insurance scheme, okay. Take certain social expenditure. People forget that when you become senior, there are certain social obligations in a fairly reasonably community led living that we do in a country like India, that becomes almost mandatory for you to spend. Take that, take a little bit estimate, do take your vacation costs, take other costs into account, find out what you would need per month today. Use a calculator to find out how much you would need at the time of your retirement. So if you are 40 today, 20 years from now, at let's say assume a certain inflation 6%, how much would it be? Okay, in 20 years. And please remember, you'll have to take a life assumption. So let's assume different people take it differently, but anything less than 85, right, I think is suicidal. You could do 90, you could do 85.
Right.
And for that period, the money that you need is something that the calculator will help you get.
All right. Well, we have another question on retirement planning as well. Srivastav writes into us. He says, I have now decided to hang up my boots and enjoy life as a retiree. I feel a 3-bucket strategy would suit me best. He's talking about bucket 1, which has 2 years expenses, bucket 2 for the next 3 years expenses, and bucket 3 for 5 years and beyond, which he says in a hybrid aggressive funds that he's talking about. So he's saying today all investments are in bucket 3. Does this strategy make sense? If so, what kind of funds should I have in bucket 1 and bucket 2? So Harsh, again here, somebody who seems to have some idea of how to go about, doing financial planning and how to plan for retirement. But if you could, give your advice as far as Srivastav is concerned.
So I think something very similar to Mr. Srivastav as to Mr. Ramakrishna. I mean, he's talking about the buckets, but how much water he needs in those buckets? How much water does he have? Okay, and how much does he need? Okay, I think he's not even mentioned his age. So trying to plan your investments without knowing the period for which you are planning it, okay, and the amount you need is like trying to say, trying to find out which car is best suited. He's talking of 3 stages of his journey. In the first stage, he says, I will use a small car. In the second stage, a mid car. In the large stage, a large car. But what is the length of your journey? How much time do you have? How much petrol and other resources can you put in? I think without deciding that, if he is doing this, he is likely to do wrong planning. Having said that, I think this bucketing concept is pretty good once you know what you are bucketing for. Depending on your risk profile, even for somebody like Mr. Srivastav, he seems to be an aggressive person from the manner in which he has put his existing investments. Even then, once he has retired, I would say at least for the first 3 to 5 years, that bucket should contain risk-free assets. I mean, risk free, like overnight funds or liquid funds or senior citizen saving schemes or PM Vaya Vandana Yojana, if he is eligible, we don't know his age. Similarly, senior citizen, we don't know his age. If he is eligible, he should put it in. Then comes the next bucket, which is the 3-4 years plus to the 7-8-10 years. That if he is very aggressive, he can put it into something like a balanced fund or an maybe even an balanced advantage fund, I would say, or maybe a balanced fund, the erstwhile balanced fund, which is now called aggressive hybrid funds. And only things about 10 years should he look at what he has already done, something like multi-cap funds. So I would still do a 3-bucket strategy, but I would have larger buckets for the first 8-10 years than what he seems to have targeted.
Right. Harsh, you also spoke about the senior citizens saving schemes. Now, again, that is something that perhaps everybody who's looking at retiring or planning for retirement should perhaps invest some part of their corpus in. But of course, now we know that the interest rates have been coming down as far as the senior citizen schemes are concerned. It's come down only by 10 basis points or 0.1% at this point in time. But it is expected to further come down given the environment that we are in currently. Having said that, do you think that it is still a good idea and it is still a good investing option for retirement planning?
See, it's currently at 8.6%. It's completely risk free, right? It is a government scheme where the money is with the government. The banks are only a channeling agency for the government. 8.6%, it's taxable, quarterly compounded, I think is a pretty good rate. And once having put in, it is locked for 5 years. It will not reduce, even though next quarter they may reduce the rate, but that will only apply to fresh deposits. If you put it in today for the entire 5-year period, plus if you opt for a 3-year extension, for the entire 8-year period, you will get 8.6%, irrespective of what is the rate that is given next quarter or the quarter after that. So currently it makes sense. In the future, it may or may not make sense. I think we cannot decide today. But as of now, if you are eligible, the only issue with senior citizen savings scheme is the interest is taxable. Please remember that. And second, you can only use the interest. You cannot use the principal. Whereas if you put money in a liquid fund, you can set up, or a overnight fund, you can actually set up a systematic withdrawal plan whereby you can withdraw both principal and interest. So I think that is the advantage that a mutual fund as a structure has over bank or such kind of deposit schemes.
All right, let's get to our next query. It's from Ayan, who sent us this question on Twitter. Says, what is the best way of transitioning across mutual fund portfolios based on age and distance from goal? Harsh, the question sounds slightly complicated, but essentially what he's simply asking is, he's talking about goal-based investing, and this is perhaps the biggest and most fundamental part of financial planning, and the importance really of having goals and having goals along with when you will need them in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. So assessing your goals in that manner. If you can answer his question and also, broadly talk about goal-based investing.
So, as you rightly said, I mean, these are pretty intelligent questions, right? Obviously, you first need to decide your goal, decide how far away it is. I'm not sure age has anything to do with it. Age is one parameter that will go into your risk-taking ability. Your risk-taking ability is decided by a lot of things. One among those parameters is age. Second is your innate risk-taking. Third is the level of resources that you have, etc. All that will together decide your risk-taking ability. Logically, other things remaining the same, younger you are, higher is your risk-taking ability. So, in a matrix to decide what kind of investments you ought to make, I think one part will be time to goal and another part could be what is your risk-taking ability. And so, if you decide your risk-taking ability, let's say it's a continuum, but you can say break it up into 3 parts: conservative, moderate, aggressive. Okay. And if you take the period, let's say you break that into 4-5 parts, up to 3 years, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 and more, something like that. Then each of these cells, there is a value that you can put in. There is no right or wrong answers, but there is one suggested matrix that I have suggested. Okay, that is an indicator of what kind of investments you ought to make, depending on the period for the goal and your risk taking ability. Now, it is not necessary that you always select the type of fund that is mentioned there. For a simple example is, let us say if you are conservative and you have 10 years to go, the suggested metric says you should put it in a balanced fund. But now, the amount of resources that you have, if you put it in a balanced fund, then your projections show that that amount will be not sufficient. In which case, probably the client needs certain counseling for him to be able to take a higher risk and invest probably in a slightly higher risk portfolio so that he can meet his goals. So, as I said, having this matrix is a great idea, but it is more of a guidepost rather than a prescription. And in all cases, I want to tell the viewers and other people watching, please take the advice of an advisor. A good advisor is really worth his weight in gold. That is what I would like to impress upon viewers.
All right. We're out of time on this edition of Investors Guide. Harsh, thank you so much for joining us, for answering all of those queries. We'll continue to take up all of your questions on personal finance, whether it's concept-based, whether it's for your own investment portfolio. We'll get all of them answered by our experts. So keep writing into us. But until tomorrow, thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned to Mirror Now.